Good evening and welcome to the After Hours Show. This is Joe in Norway. I'll be your cook this evening. I'm joined by Ann Lee, a retired college professor and community member at the Daily Kos. She's a member of the National Council of Independent Scholars and is a contributor to the book, The Political Economy of Art, Making the Nation of Culture. Evening, Ann. How's it going?
Hey there.
Hey.
As well as can be expected, considering that the ceasefire just ended.
Yes, I've heard they've leafleted the South, Yunis, and expect everybody to flee towards Rafah, which would be closer to the Egyptian border.
Yeah.
So further concentration of the north or the south. And we'll discuss some of that later on. There are some other events this week, namely how shall we say, a statesman of a certain order kicked the bucket this week. One fortified on bratwurst and Wiener Schnitzel, so obviously lived at least 100 years. Henry Kissinger. I was remembering Tom Lehrer, the musician. He said political satire became obsolete when Henry Kissinger was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
Indeed. Tom Lehrer, I believe, outlived him.
We're going to do our best this evening to not make that the case. But yeah, I thought I would do some cooking inspired by, just to let everybody know who's new here. This is Kitchen ASMR. I quietly cook while Anne discusses events going on in the world and issues that you should be aware about and how to think about them. And I cook quietly. We do all vegetarian cuisine here. So no bratwurst or Wiener Schnitzel in Henry's honor. We're going to do a little, let's see, let me check my notes here. We've got a number of items here. Our old friend Bitter Melon will be carpet bombing our plate this evening in a bittersweet remembrance of the Nobel Peace Prize winner and famed war criminal Henry Kissinger. Now I've got sticky rice here to represent the killing fields. We have our beloved bitter melon, which will be representing the B-52 bombers. I don't know if this is really tasteful. I'm a bit nervous about approaching it this way. We've got tofu that I'll blanch and sear, delicate fleshy tofu, which will delicately blanch and sear like the burnt flesh of all of the bombs cascaded on the ground. And For the veins and blood, I'll shred red cabbage in the famed German American's honor, and we'll season it with a few other items: ginger, chili. We got a spicy uh, numbing with uh, Sichuan peppercorn. I'll toast some, maybe over toast some black sesame seeds to represent the burning embers on the ground. We have a little bergamot here, same Southeast Asian treat, and we'll season it. So I'm going to be steaming the sticky rice in the pressure cooker again. Pressure cooker makes a return. A little experiment. Because I've forgotten how long to do it in the pressure cooker. I think it's 12 minutes with a natural release. We'll see. So I thought we might mention that it's a shame that Anthony Bourdain left us too soon, because he had a few choice words to say after his visit to Cambodia. Moment. Tony said, "Once you've been to Cambodia, you'll never stop wanting to beat Henry Kissinger to death with your bare hands. You'll never again be able to open a newspaper and read about that treacherous, prevaricating, murderous scumbag sitting down for a nice chat, Charlie Rose, or attending some black tie affair of a new glossy magazine without choking. Witness what Henry did in Cambodia, the fruits of his genius for statesmanship, and you will never understand why he's not sitting in the dock at The Hague next to Milosevic. My bitter melon tonight will represent all of the unexploded ordnance left by the US bombing of Southeast Asia. It's just, every time you think about it, it's incomprehensible. The amount of unexploded ordnance that is still killing people after all of these years, particularly in Laos. I think Laos got the brunt of it. But I will get to cooking, and we can maybe discuss a little bit of the Israel situation a little after the serving. You had some updates for us, too soon on Ukraine.
Yeah, it's actually interesting that demining Ukraine is also going to be probably it's going to take a decade to demine Ukraine, considering how many millions of landmines have been and other kind of ordnance.
Cluster bombs as well, cluster munitions.
The cluster munitions have been redesigned so that they don't quite last as long. I mean, relative to being dangerous, but you know, there's no quality control, and of course, so many cluster munitions were made that there's a lot of older ordnance out there. Without getting too technical, it has to do with the the firing mechanism that is enacted or made live once the things are launched. It's a big canister that gets launched from a plane, or well, there are artillery-based cluster bombs as well, but they just go every which way. I think a farmer was killed the other day in that sense in Kherson. That is the south west portion of the map that if some of you can see. All kinds of mines are all over the place. We could call it a friendly fire incident, but a major general in the Russian army, who's only in his mid-40s, uh, apparently drove his vehicle over a landmine, and it undoubtedly was a Russian landmine. So whether it was intentional or not is an interesting question. Um, but the fact is, they've lost another major general, and the loss of officers is sort of a big deal relative to this the current state of warfare. In the lower left in Harrison, we can start there. It stuff happens every day, artillery back and forth. Apparently there's a foothold for Ukrainian troops on the bottom part there. That's the left side of the Dnieper River. It's very cold, and there is snow out there somewhere, and it there's not a lot of movement. I mean, there's plenty of bombardment, but troop movements are a little bit more restricted. Let's put it that way. The map that you see is a this week's HIMARS. This is precision guided missile strikes from the Ukrainian side on Russian positions. Every one of those little red things is a launch. And I think you can see that a certain number of them have been launched relative to the Harrison side in the lower left corner. It is an interesting question of whether, and the Russians have dedicated another brigade, I think, down into that point, and they're starting to move some of their more elite guards groupings down into that corner. So that's one thing. But the week has been a busy week. The latest news is that apparently Ukrainian saboteurs of one kind or another attacked. There are two sort of major lines in the far east of Russia. One is the Trans-Siberian Railway. These are both railways. And then there's another line which is north of that, and they're parallel. One of them goes through about a 15-kilometer long tunnel. And whoever did the incident, the official version is that relay cabinets caught fire. Of course, four relay cabinets catching fire all at once seems to be a little unusual, and it all happened while a train with I think gasoline and jet fuel was going through it. It had jet fuel and iron ore, so a fairly long train going through a tunnel. Suddenly, well, some call it an explosion, others would call it a fire. The video seems to have a pretty major plume coming out of it. So there is some video from the initial event, but there's plenty of disinformation. Arguments about whether it was or wasn't the major transport material route from China to Russia, whether the alternate route on the Trans-Siberian rail link was better or worse, and a whole variety of other things come up. But it's just interesting that behind the lines, and like some of the, I guess you could call them anarchist groups who have been sabotaging the rail system of Russia, are at work. The claim on the Ukrainian side is that special ops did this little deed, and as we know, they've been launching at somewhat odd intervals drones, etc., on things fairly far behind Russian lines. This is going to continue. It hasn't abated, but it is interesting to see that sort of the ideal way that you're going to sabotage something is to make it catch fire inside a tunnel, particularly a fairly major tunnel. So that's the latest event there. And of course, people are still sorting out what actually happened. This is very similar to the events of prior weeks where the Kerch Bridge was under attack, and the recent storm in this past week wiped out a lot of defenses. So it doesn't mean that there's any invasion that's going to come in Crimea, because there was a somewhat major storm in on the Black Sea, but it did take out a bunch of ships and barges that were sort of meant to deter any kind of amphibious landing. It also wiped out some trench works, etc., on beaches, and so that's an interesting development. Not that it really altered much of the battle situation, but it did force some more relocation of assets from Crimea back further into other sites farther away from the battle lines. So there have been daily air alerts. There is not a day without air alerts. There was a recent attack directly on Kyiv. Russians claim that they hit something. Not very much got through. I think it was nearly 75 missiles and etc. drones were launched, and the defenders managed to get most of them. There are new Patriot air batteries that have been transferred from the European Union, countries in the European Union, whether it's Poland or Germany, etc. There's still, on the equipment side, there is still lagging in terms of what's getting transferred where, but the recent data shows that the United States is not the key contributor of funds to the Ukrainians. The total, by some estimates, is something like $288 billion in armaments and aid have been transferred to Ukraine from a whole bunch of different folks. And so that's there. The underlying subtext to complaining and discussing munitions has been the so-called 1 million rounds of artillery ammunition that has been transferred from North Korea to, which arrived a while back, but the actual location of these stocks and stores has been not been well reported. But I think that's partially just simply, operational security. They really don't want to let you. They don't want to imply that it might be in a specific location or even all in one place, because seems that the second something like that happens, partisans or other kinds of military intelligence seems to locate it and then blow it up. The major blowing up has been in the Advika area, in up near Bakhmut, in the upper right. If you can look at the map, there's a little pocket that the Russians really want to grab before the elections, which are coming up in a week or so. Needless to say, there's not much competition for Putin, but I think he wants to have a propaganda victory of some kind. And as he's tried to achieve these things before major events, they've tried to say, well, we've seized this or that, the other thing, and generally that hasn't worked out very well for the Russians. Currently, they're throwing more conscripts against this particular site. There's been an increase, the largest number of casualties in many months in this sector has arrived. It's over 1,000 a day, which includes, not necessarily everyone got killed, but a lot of people were taken out of the fight. And so a variety of prison conscripts and other kinds of assorted folks. There is several private military corporations who do have troops in the area, and they're being thrown at the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have been practicing what they normally do, and that is they give tremendous resistance, but actually begin to withdraw because they don't really want to get trapped in a encirclement. But that little pocket there that you can even see at this scale is not so much that it's critical, because as we know from earlier months that they got into several of these kinds of positions and essentially withdrew in time. This is probably no different. For some people, this is major because it is a kind of egress route for getting to Donetsk city, which is actually fairly important and is a kind of focus relative to the claims of separatist claims for autonomous republics that have been resisting since 2014. So this is actually a crucial area. as I've said in weeks past, why are they fighting over this particular region? It is a important region relative to numbers of folks who have more Russian kind of identification from a cultural point of view. But it's not simply, it can't be as simple as that. The population is more bilingual. The population is voted in 1991 that they did not want to be part of Russia. So there's those kinds of issues are ones that have been agitated in a variety of ways. And of course, we know that in 2014 with the Little Green Men, et cetera, there was this seizing of various things like Crimea and these two republics, Luhansk and Donetsk. But the fact that the Ukrainians are right up to the doorstep yet again, it's not certain that they're going to try and assault Donetsk city. That seems relatively impossible relative to how much that has been fortified and defended over the decade, the near decade of defending that area. More likely is that there's going to be a kind of sweeping down in the Kherson area down the lower left, and the kind of consistent developing from the Kherson city itself to have a variety of places that are defendable, a foothold, as it were, and a means by which the assault on Crimea can begin. It has all kinds of other tactical implications, some of which have interesting disinformation elements that have been built into it. Every day is a disinformation day in this war, so it continues on that kind of score. Other things that have happened this week include a variety of discussions about the quality of air support, continued discussion about training, continued efforts to strike behind the battle lines, and emphasis, as I said, on this sort of northeastern portion of the line, which is, as I said, reinforced with a lot of less capable troops, the ones that replaced the Wagner troops that were there earlier on before Wagner got disassembled, at least in the context of Ukraine. So that's what's going on at the present moment, with a few, as I said, officers getting attacked and blown up in this kind of wider area of operations. But it is a very long front. It has anywhere from 10 to 20 different smaller interaction areas where I don't know if you want to call them skirmishes, but small military actions. And so the operational area is quite long and large for this country. The other attacks have been on the infrastructure, have been infrastructure attacks, air attacks that have begun to threaten the electrical grid of Ukraine, and that's not going to taper off. It's going to increase through the coming weeks. It's likely that there will be at least one infrastructure attack every week on some behind the lines aspect of the Ukrainian electrical grid. What is interesting, of course, is the Ukrainians have also decided to attack components of the occupied areas, their electrical grid. So it is a kind of tip for tap in terms of these attacks. The usual things apply. The problem of nuclear power plants, the kinds of areas around nuclear power plants, other infrastructure elements that could be at risk. The fact that it's cold and snowy again, and not in a heavy duty way, but there is snow on the ground and in most areas, and it's troubling to try and get around, and people are fixed in place, and there's trenches, and it's this problem of describing it as a more fixed set of a bit of warfare continues, even though I think there's a sufficient amount of indication that air assets are being better organized, and the range and realm of drone production has improved. Ukrainians have their own domestic production of drones. They're very careful about what they use in terms of things that they use for their public relations effort. That, for example, usually when you see footage, they're usually done from domestically created equipment. That is from the Ukrainian drone industry, and which is fairly wide now. And of course, in the public relations battle, is being countered against Russian support for Iran, and a variety of deals that have been made between Russia and Iran in terms of supporting the exchange of munitions produced in Iran transferred to the Russians. Several deals have been made. Certain types of advanced fourth generation fighters, jet fighters, have been promised to Iran as, I assume, partial payment for a variety of other things like advanced missiles, drones, etc., being transferred to Russia from Iran. And of course, the issue is that they haven't sabotaged that drone plant in Russia, but I assume that's on a target list somewhere. So this is the question online. Negotiated settlements. There's very little of the idea that there is going to be a negotiated settlement, considering that Vladimir Putin in the last week made another pretty wacky speech about how Ukraine doesn't exist, and that essentially what he wants to reclaim is all of the pre-fall countries. And that includes the Baltics and etc. That he wants to bring all that.
Pre-Soviet fall, pre-collapse of the Soviet Union.
Yes, essentially. Well, he made a discussion, and it wasn't, of course, in the context of fall. It was just simply that Russia is this thing, and that other things are subordinate to it, and he wants to restore whatever, blah blah blah. And but that speech was just made. It was made this past week, and so any hope for negotiation doesn't seem quite possible relative to that. Other discussions on the periphery, of course, are the Finnish protection and closing of their borders. They've kind of choked off a variety of ways in which you can easily get from Russia to Finland by walking over the border or driving over the border. Those have been generally cut off now. And so if you wanted to get to Finland from Russia, you would have to do it by train or by airplane. And of course, that's more complicated. The Finns stepped right in very early. They were very proactive about this before anything built up on the edge. And this is a more right-wing government in Finland, and so their issue about it is sort of tainted with a kind of populist kind of element to it, that they don't want any more migrants coming in. So it has that other kind of right-wing thing about non-Finnish people coming over the border. It's a much more fluid border. People would actually go to Finland for the weekend and shit like that, and that's not happening anymore. At least at the border level. So that's happening. There's and of course it's conditioned against other things, the sort of screwing around with the talk about whether the cable connection, the trans sea Baltic Sea cables being messed with,
The chili is getting to me over here.
Fire. How are you doing, Joe? Aside from being choked by
the citron peppercorn and the chili, toasted chili got right into my nasal passages here. Just sauteing the cabbage, spicy cabbage. There you go. I'll mute now.
Spicy food is a big deal, particularly in the global South. Let's put it that way. That it is a greater feature of the global South than the global North. I guess we've done our break here, so let me move on to the next kind of craziness. Let me suggest to you that we're in very strange straits. I was going to talk about the today, Friday, was a mammoth, as it were. There is a RICO um, case being worked on in Georgia, in Fulton County, that accuses a grouping of people, some of whom have already turned state's evidence, uh, about the so-called fake electors that were being attempted to be put in place so that as one component, as one option, a tactical option in the overthrow of the United States government. That is, that fake electors from a multiplicity of states, this is not just one state, this is several states, some of which still need to be sort of worked out from a prosecutorial point of view, that, you know, it is a crime to attempt to subvert the election at the state level by offering a alternative, whatever that might be, or contingent is the current argument, slate of electors. And of course, you actually have to do paperwork, and there is just in each state, whether it's Michigan, Wisconsin, even New Mexico, Arizona, these states had to assemble people who would claim that they were, Nevada, claim that they were fake electors. So there's an entire, well, if you want to call it a conspiracy, it certainly is a felonious conspiracy to put up a alternate set of electors that could be either put in place. Now, this has lots of options, tactical options on January 6th. But the point was to have these electors available to support some sort of idea that the election needed to have a do-over. This is this whole thing about Trump trying to freeze the election in place before all the votes were counted. And it's a ploy that has happened before, and everyone just says, well, this is not all the votes are being counted, and you're trying to declare a win before actually every vote is counted. It is that whole question, the larger question of voter suppression that exists in a democratic society where there should be one person, one vote in the ideal context. Well, needless to say, some GOP party members in at least 5 states wanted to say, well, it's not one person, one vote. It's actually 2 people per vote because, and ours counts more in that sense. So today's hearing in Georgia was, arguments to the effect that because there is the 10th Amendment unenumerated elements or components of portion of the law in under the 10th Amendment, certain things just aren't, you can't define them, or to use that kind of inclusiveness or that kind of vague generality, that it's possible for the state not to lose its standing relative to a federal election. And a variety of arguments were made, has to do with technicalities. They're really trying to work, it's working the refs essentially. But the fact that they're down now to 9th and 10th Amendment issues about unenumerated rights or whatever raises a much larger and more complicated question relative to trying to get this case defeated. So Trumpian lawyers at the more local level, that is, there are Georgia-based Trump lawyers trying to make these kinds of arguments, trying to say essentially nothing counts. We get to redefine everything. These are contingent as opposed to alternate. It is all of this kind of ways in which you're trying to work it. And they've been looking for models to try and show that illegal acts didn't occur when people organized themselves to defraud the election by creating non-legal, non-designated, non-official electors. And up to the point where, and now we have, there's been video since 2020 fake Michigan electors trying to bum rush the government and being turned back by state troopers, but insisting that they were the electors when in fact the state trooper at the door says, "Well, no, I don't think so. They're already here." So it is complicated, and of course, based on these kinds of technicalities, and needless to say, there is, as some lawyers have described, there is this sort of making the case, then sort of waving your arms, and then ultimately pounding the table, and we're almost to the table pounding point in the set of arguments. We know, of course, that some of these cases, for example, the Georgia level prosecution of the RICO case, may not have its resolution before the 2024 election, whereas the one more directly associated with January 6th in D.C. will likely have its conviction prior to the election, despite all the attempts to delay it. Similarly, the issue of the Mar-a-Lago documents case is likely not going to go forward before the election, and likely will be determined after the election happens. So much hinges for the Trump folks on whether they can delay all these matters and allow a kind of reinforce the idea that there is a presidential immunity in this particular case, and the unitary executive and all of those other elements of a good authoritarian coup are kind of at work. But it's all happening against the background of people who don't quite tell the truth. Today, George Santos, just a couple of hours ago, was expelled from the Congress because the ethics report, the committee report, and the GOP rules in that particular sense. It's some of the most egregious crimes not fully convicted have been charged and indicted. I'm just personally interested in the idea that George Santos, now citizen George Santos, not so much honorable, described his own position as being the Mary Magdalene of Congress. I find that interesting because it has all kinds of other interpretive possibilities, but it does raise this interesting theological question of whether George Santos is or isn't Mary Magdalene, and whether we are going to get a set of religious and miraculous elements that are going to come from all of the particular craziness that we begin to see in this current Congress. Special elections are coming. There will be a special election for George Santos's seat. It is unclear who is going to run. There's a variety of candidates, some of whom have actually served in Congress before, who are coming up. It is a Biden-leaning district, but at the local level, there's still, which is why Santos is there, a GOP element that could come forward depending on which candidate is being supported. It's fairly complicated. There's a lot of moving around in the New York delegations on these matters, so that's kind of important and interesting, if only because George Santos's 15 minutes may be completely up, but it's not without its sort of religious amusement.
I don't know, and I think you might be reading into the U.S. politicians' actions a little too much now.
Oh no, there's all kinds of monkey business that's going to happen. Scott Perry's name came up recently, and he's actually much more key to the attempted coup at some moment, but he's probably never going to get prosecuted until he leaves Congress. But he's the guy who introduced what's his name, Jeffrey Clark, to Trump in terms of the attempt to insert a acting attorney general in place in order to facilitate the coup. So all of these things are there. The beauty of all of this is that so much that the Justice Department assembled is all there. It just hasn't been sort of made more transparent, which is a big problem for some folks, because like putting Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden called their bluff this past week. He said, "Well, you guys want to talk to me? Well, we'll talk in open session." And he's perfectly willing to, bear it all in that sense. And of course, they've got nothing. The GOP's got nothing. There's no evidence. It's all speculative and made out of whole cloth. And so they want to have closed sessions so that it can take advantage, not unlike the McCarthy hearings, et cetera. I have in my hand a list of blah blah blah. That things that are slightly more ambiguous about Hunter Biden can be promoted as a trope in the 2024 election. These guys are idiots, but it's interesting to just see how these things proceed. I don't. Nobody can shoot straight on the GOP side, so that's kind of where we are. And last night, and I think that it hasn't gotten enough press, is Gavin Newsom debated on Fox News Ron DeSantis, and preliminary results appear to be that Ron DeSantis really got Newsom actually sort of wiped the floor with him, and so it's that's interesting. And the advantage, of course, is that Fox News audiences will get to see this thing that they might actually start. It's another shiny object that they will claim that, oh, well, the new conspiracy is that Newsom is the heir apparent, et cetera. So this will be interesting. It has that possibility, of course, but whole bunches of other things have to occur. So, but fascinating, because I think that this shiny object will make lots of trouble for the GOP in the coming weeks. How's that food going?
So, we're doing all right. I'm all finished, just ready to assemble.
Excellent.
Got
I'm hungry.
The sticky rice.
Are those things
out of
really
the pressure cooker.
strong?
Excuse me?
You were wincing before. Is the air still polluted?
I still have the toasted chili in my the back of my throat. So,
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh. Seems to come out all right. Maybe a little undercooked. Oh, no, perfect. Now let's see. How shall we put this together? Here's our bitter bombs. Just blanched these in stock and chilled them afterwards. We've got our pan-seared tofu, spicy sweet and sour numbing cabbage, and we got the sticky rice back there. Let's see what I get there.
It's a very nice dark sauce.
I was hoping it would be a little more bloody colored.
Nah. Well, I mean, blood does coagulate. Blood sausage was a big deal for Anthony Bourdain.
Yes, he would definitely. I don't know if he'd be rolling in his grave right now, but given his negative view on vegetarianism, I think he'd mind my little something for Henry.
I think that things would have been different had he had to work in more vegetarian restaurants. I think it's just comfort with, meaty things. It's dominated that. Whereas his buddy at Repair, I think is a vegetarian, or at least he's a Buddhist. if nothing else. And
Mhm.
so those are kind of interesting sideline.
He was kind of behind. His main gripe is just given the travel
Yes.
and being invited to strangers' homes that you ought to be eating whatever you're served, especially if you're traveling in poor regions and the only meal. I've been to family homes where we were given a meal that the family doesn't eat, and they wait for us to eat everything before we've had anything, and it's kind of awkward or something that you have qualms about. But they spent so much time and effort. And it's part of.
Yeah, yeah, that is the bulk of the kind of narratives in the different series for Bourdain, is the issue of the defining the family meal and trying to integrate, what counts as the event itself is, in terms of eating.
Well, I can tell you for a fact that his mother was not a vegetarian. She was a very well-known French cook because I knew her mother. I knew his mother. I knew the family because my mother was very good friends with Bourdain's mother, Gladys.
Gladys.
Gladys was her name. She passed away a number of years ago, but she was a great cook, but in the French style, and a critic for the New York Times too.
So if a family that you're visiting, maybe a poor family in some remote place, is offering you some food and it turns out you have a very serious allergic reaction to some of the food they're offering, then what are you supposed to do?
Got me.
Starve.
I'm just saying that for myself as a vegan, but just to use that excuse, well, I'm allergic to meat or something like that. I wouldn't eat whatever they offered if it included animal products. I just wouldn't do it.
I think there's a difference between. It just seems to me there's a difference between, kind of the occasion of being a guest as opposed to regular meals, and I think that's the kind of exception that needs to be made.
One, it's not going to kill you,
right?
And
then there's just the history is actually interesting, of course, because of the history of offal, right? The whole question that the poorer classes always had to do with very horrible cuts of meat. That entire
which became
cuisines.
very shishi about 20 years ago. In
Yes.
London, there was a famous restaurant that served almost exclusively offal.
Sounds awful to me.
Yeah.
It was working. Burnt sesame embers. I know what I needed. The stick. Now the stick. Not missing anything else. There we go. Sticky rice, sweet and sour cabbage, bitter melon, blanched bitter melon, and pan-seared tofu.
Nice. I'm hungry again.
We got some hungry night owls here. Be hot. Just, were there any other questions anyone had? Or...
Yeah, I have a question, Joe. Can you talk more about the sticky rice process? Because I know how the Thais make it, and it's quite involved.
Well, I soaked it for 8 hours.
Okay, right.
Overnight. I soaked it for 8 hours and rinsed. And then in this case, all I did was put it in a steamer basket in a netting. I don't know if you saw that.
No, I didn't see that. Okay.
Okay. So there's a steamer basket under the, this is a kind of cheesecloth I use. So it doesn't go through the basket. And I just put the rice in there and bring it up to pressure. You're using a pressure cooker or just regular?
Well,
regular stovetop.
We would use a like it was like a double boiler situation. It was they boiled water under bamboo steamer.
Yep. That'll be like a is it bamboo or some other material, straw, usually a cone shape, and then you steam that for a fair amount of time. But I cheated and just used the pressure cooker.
So what type of rice would you recommend? The kind of short, sweet rice? Or is it harder to do with long grain?
Well, there's more glutamate. There's the sticky rice is a special variety, and they tend to stick together rather than. I don't know if you can see. They maintain the kernels maintain their what do you call it, form, but it's all clumped together so that you can form it into little pieces for dipping in sauces and picking up things. But with calrose or basmati rice, those they wouldn't have the same. I can't remember all of the ingredients in them, but they're less sticky, basically. You could maybe get it with arborio rice or some of the Japanese short grain sushi rice.
Yeah.
If you cook the sushi rice with a little bit more water, you can maybe achieve something like this. But
so part of it would also be about the washing of the rice too, wouldn't it?
Mm.
Well, you said soaking overnight, so I assume that would
that takes care of the washing. Yeah. Rinse it. I had something to share here. Hope that answers your question, Bruce.
Yes, because I'd never seen it done with a pressure cooker, and I didn't know that you soaked it overnight, which is typical to do.
Yeah, well, apparently if you use the pressure cooker, you don't need to soak it. But my test here gave it a texture that is perfect. And that was 12 minutes under pressure. I don't think if you didn't soak it, I don't think you would achieve the same. But then there's a bunch of different techniques you can. Instead of the way I did it, you put a glass bowl in the pressure cooker with water, so the same amount of rice to water, and then you cook it that way. It'll absorb the water and then steam it the rest of the way. That's one technique. I've done that and I found that it gets too mushy. But this came out perfect. I was a little nervous that it would be too mushy, but overnight soak and then steam for 12 minutes with a natural release was perfect. So then if you do it standard on the stovetop with a steamer basket, it'd probably take you 35, 45 minutes maybe, closer to 50.
Yeah, that's about right.
Mm.
Any comment on long grain black wild rice there, Joe?
Ooh. Why, I haven't had that since I was in the States, living in the States.
I just laid
That's a
out in
pricey
chat
commodity over here. Boy.
how much I love having that with sour cream and morel mushrooms.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I do miss that. Such a special grass, apparently. I guess it's not a rice, technically. So, Anne,
Oh,
did you, oh, go ahead.
what is it? I missed that. What is it? It's not a rice. What is it?
A grass. It's a
Oh,
different
okay.
type. It's completely different from rice, apparently.
Okay.
Well, like wild rice is not really rice.
Yeah.
Uh,
Israeli government received a document that they term the Jericho Wall, aka the Bin Laden determined to attack U.S. memo outlining the Hamas attack plan. You heard about this? The New York Times wrote it up.
Big bombshell from last night.
Oops. Well, the claim is that it was aspirational, whatever that means.
Yeah. And they basically didn't take it serious because it was not something they believed they would take.
I mean, who would ever fly a plane into a building? That's crazy. Yeah. And this wasn't like a few months earlier. This was like a freaking year ago. Like they had a year. This was sitting on somebody's desk and not passed up the chain of command.
You know, it's not a shame that Henry's dead, but it's a shame that he can't appreciate the surrealness of the situation with Blinken speaking to the Israelis to prevent a further major increase in civilian casualties. Blinken said he made clear the imperative before any operations go forward in southern Gaza. There'll be a clear plan in place that puts a premium on protecting citizens as well as sustaining and building on humanitarian assistance getting to Gaza. Now, this is in the very same day that the release, they're giving tens of thousands of new armaments to Israel. Unreal. Netanyahu told Blinken, oh, this was a release from Netanyahu. He didn't give a televised thing. This is the same Hamas that carried out the terrible massacre on October 7th, the same Hamas that tries to murder us everywhere. I told him, we swore, and I swore to eliminate Hamas. Nothing will stop us. So they've deposited leaflets on Khan Yunis and been telling people to flee to Rafah, which is in the south at the Egyptian border. I don't see how. Plus, arming Israelis more and just giving them carte blanche. Their plan seems to be to finish the Nakba.
I believe it was me that once said, shoot anything that moves.
So what we're looking at here are it's from a site called the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. It's disaggregated data collection analysis and crisis mapping project. ACLED for short, I believe. It collects information on the dates, actors, locations, fatalities, and types of all reported political violence and protests events around the world. The ACLED team conducts analysis to describe, explore, and test conflict scenarios and makes both data and analysis open for free to use by the public. See if I can zoom in here.
Yes, they're an excellent site data.
Yeah, so the countries you're going to see out here, they're colored regarding the UN General Assembly vote on a ceasefire. So green is in favor, peach is against, blue are abstentions, gray is non-voting. So what's kind of alarming are the blue abstentions. We've got Canada, Sweden, Finland, Iceland. And is Finland surprising there?
No, that's very consistent. You know, it's unfortunate, but that's kind of the UN always goes to the middle in terms of you know, trying to be assertive relative to votes, and they always know they're going to be, you know, kind of cut off at the pass by the Security Council anyway.
And Harsh, what's with India's abstention? Harsh in the house. So there's quite a number of protests worldwide. It's not nothing, as they say, but we're a long way from getting any sort of cessation of the violence.
Well, the awareness is certainly broad, and without overbearing the issue, there's been better reporting now about the shooting of 3 Palestinian students in Vermont.
Vermont, yeah. One other thing to note here are the pro-Palestine versus pro-Israel demonstration. It's quite significant. Overwhelming support for the Palestinian side.
I heard my name. What?
Oh yeah, I was wondering why you think India abstained from the ceasefire vote.
Oh, it's the Israeli connection, right? With defense. So
armaments.
they're running a lot of snooping software,
cyber.
Right? Yeah, the cyber.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll cover it someday. Like there have been like a lot of cases where they're jailing like lefty folks, like professors, journalists, everyone. And they have been finding these manifestos and all the mail exchange where they're planning to kill Modi and become like do anti-national activities. They're presenting these kind of facts. Basically, they're hacking their phones with their, what is it? I forgot the name of the software.
Pegasus.
Yeah, the Pegasus. Yeah. Yes,
Pegasus, the no-click spyware.
Yeah. So that's their most popular one, but yeah, it's mostly that.
Yeah.
But that's the funny thing, because I think as far as I remember, like 80s and 90s, we were pretty pro-Palestinian, actually. I know like Arafat came to India as well at some point. But, yeah.
Well, one war criminal down. I've got a few others. We have
I was
Yeah.
watching a
You
thing.
can't get rid of you can't get rid of me that easily. I'll be
Yeah. It is
Warm down
amazing.
there, Henry.
Well, I have to tell you, I was a bit confused. 1 minute, I was quietly dreaming in my bed about the fond memories of carpet bombing Cambodia. And then suddenly I woke up and I felt like I was in a Hieronymus Bosch painting. Oh, yes, it's a bit hot down here.
Yeah, well, considering that I usually ignore the news as much as possible because of my pain, the fact that I was able to see this right away and share it with Lane was a great pleasure. To give Lane that news.
Well,
I'm surprised I haven't had the housing authority out because I cheered loudly. It was about 4 o'clock in the morning when you laid that on his net. Yes. My neighbours wouldn't have been happy.
Well, we've got the writers workshop tomorrow and this and that. Later tonight, we've got the Twilight Zone, I believe. Have a short
Weekly
night
Marks
programming.
Sunday.
Weekly Marks. And
Columbo.
Columbo.
Twilight Zone in a couple minutes. All very exciting.
If you're interested in joining us,
Sunday social Soul Sunday, Soul Sunday social, the Soulful Social Sunday social.
Good music.
Anyhow, after Columbo, soul music and civil rights. There you go. This week it's new soul, hip hop, R&B. There you go. And it's.
And I'd like to give a shout out to Layden there. Thanks for the intro music. How's that outro going?
I suppose you could sort of reverse the no, you couldn't do that.
Like the Beatles.
Yeah. Number 9. Yep.
Well, on that note, good night, everyone. Take care.
See you next week.
Bye.